I'm addicted to stress, that's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long. And I hang around like a bum, and I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. I'm addicted to stress, it's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long. And I hang around like a bum, I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me.
It's the little things that get you, it's the little things that get you when you weren't paying attention. It's the little things that get you, it's the little things that get you, it's the little things that get you when you weren't paying attention.
I'm trying to cut down on my caffeine consumption, so when I get up, I just have one cup of coffee, and I like to have another cup of coffee with my breakfast. And on the way to work, I like to get a cup of coffee, like the kind of cup of coffee that you get with a donut. If I never get the donut, I just have the cup of coffee. And when I get to work, I like to have a cup of coffee, because I like to have a coffee when I'm talking on the phone. But it usually goes cold, and I need to get another cup of coffee, and it's lunch, and I have an espresso. And when I get back, it's not morning anymore, so I have a Diet Cola and another Diet Cola, and by then I'm feeling fine, and I'm feeling pretty sharp, and I'm feeling pretty wired, and I'm getting things done. But right about 2, I get this little tiny migraine, and it starts behind my eyes, and it moves to the back of my neck, and it moves to the bottom of my spine, but it doesn't get there till 5 or 6 o'clock, which is the end of the day, so I'm fine, so I'm fine, so I'm fine. Except when I have to work late, which I usually do. I'm addicted to stress, that's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long. And I hang around like a bum, and I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me.
It's the little things that get you, it's the little things that get you when you weren't paying attention. It's the little things that get you, it's the little things that get you, it's the little things that get you when you weren't paying attention.
I love to work, I love to run, I love to play real hard. I love to steal little things from the grocery store, like a piece of bubble gum, or sometimes I just stick my thumb in a peach and leave it there. I love to work, I love to run, I love to water ski, snowboard, jet ski, skydive, parasail, hang glide, rollerblade, mountain bike, bungee jump. Well, I mean, I love to do these things if I ever have the time. I love to work, I love to work, I love to work out after work. I love to spend a little time with this woman that I'm seeing, so we never really get a little time to spend together. So we call each other up and we talk about work. But what I think I really love is to get up by myself on a little tiny island in the middle of the ocean with just me, a book, and a cellular phone, and a personal computer in case something came up. And I'd eat, and I'd drink, and I'd run, and I'd sleep, and I wouldn't do nothing except swim all day. Except I don't know how to do laps in the ocean. Where are the sharks? Where are the sharks? And there's this kind of anemone that sticks in your foot, and the poison goes up to your brain, and you die. And sand fleas, yuck! But actually, I think it'd be really relaxing, just me by myself in the middle of the ocean, and that's what I'd really love to do more than anything else, except I probably hate it. I'm addicted to stress, that's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long, and I hang around like a bum, and I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me. Everybody's thinking about me.
You can't stomp the Trump. You cannot stomp the Trump. You can't stomp the Trump. You cannot stomp the Trump. You can't stomp the Trump. You cannot stomp the Trump. You can't stomp the Trump. You cannot stomp the Trump. Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Drain the swamp. Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Drain the swamp. We need to build a wall. He's gonna build that thing up taller than this. Well, if he does build it, I hope it's rock solid with bricks.
I'll tell you what it's gonna be made of. It's gonna be made of hardened concrete.
That. This is for Trump. Ball up a fist. And keep that shit balled.
Thank you.
We love our military. And we love Trump.
Thank you very much.
You're either for or against. And if you can't decide, I'll do it for you with this. We better give Trump props, cause what we got in office, he'll just gas his plane up and fly around. Bing, bing, bong, tightened, rising. That's not disrespecting the military.
Slim Shady is a winner.
Hola, memoirs, and welcome to yet another episode of 7 at 7, the least watched name in news. I am your host, Sevi Rose, and I have already got a fucking, what are they called? Super chat. Thank you so very much, Self-Sealing Steambolt. Fist of the First, he says, and he threw €2 at me. How fucking awesome was that? The stream video today was by Placeboing, someone you might see pretty frequently on my channel. I love his remixes. They're just fucking brilliant. The link to that, along with the music and all the articles for today, are going to be found in the description box below, so don't forget to check that. And yeah, I do believe we can just jump right into it all, because we've got quite a lot of stuff to talk about. But first subject coming up is net neutrality. And if you're not sure where I stand on the issue, I'm actually against net neutrality as a law. But not for the reasons most people are. I'm against it because it actually serves the interests of both the ISPs and the other monopolistic internet companies that exist out there. And I'm going to get into why. If you've been following my blog, by the way, I wrote a decent blog post about it over on Medium. You can find that at medium.com/@Sevi. But I would really like to go into the hard details. So we're actually going to be looking at the U.S. Code today and breaking down a little bit of U.S. Code and constitutional law. So let us just switch over here right quick. Let's start by saying people talk about Title II in reference to net neutrality. And technically, when they're talking about Title II, what they're actually referring to is 47 U.S. Code, Chapter 5, Subchapter 2, Part 1, Common Carrier Regulation, a system that was set up back in 1934 for the management and assurance that the original telephone telecommunications companies and radio telecommunications companies would play fairly and not operate in such a way that would fuck with the consumers, or trap the consumers in fights over the usage of infrastructure. We're going to actually go through and read just a little bit of the actual quote-unquote Title II, so you understand just what net neutrality was meant to be tying ISPs to. It shall be the duty of every common carrier engaged in interstate or foreign communication by wire or radio to furnish such communication service upon reasonable request therefor, and in accordance with the orders of the Commission, in cases where the Commission, after opportunity for hearing, finds such action necessary or desirable in the public interest, to establish physical connections with other carriers, to establish through routes and charges applicable thereto, and divisions of such charges, and to establish and provide facilities and regulations for operating such through routes. All charges, practices, classifications, and regulations for and in connection with such communication service shall be just and reasonable, and any such charge, practice, classification, or regulation that is unjust or unreasonable is declared to be unlawful, provided, and this is where shit gets interesting, that communications by wire or radio subject to this chapter may be classified into day, night, repeated, unrepeated, letter, commercial, press, government, and such other classes as the Commission may decide to be just and reasonable. Those key words right there, as the Commission may decide to be just and reasonable, is extremely important. And we're going to get there in just a moment. Provided further, that nothing in this chapter or any other provision of law shall be construed to prevent a common carrier subject to this chapter from entering into or operating under any contract with any common carrier not subject to this chapter for the exchange of their services, if the Commission is of the opinion that such contract is not contrary to the public interest. provided further that nothing in this chapter or in any other provision of law shall prevent a common carrier subject to this chapter from furnishing reports of positions of ships at sea to news. Okay, the rest of this is actually for the sake of protection of Americans, but I want you to take into mind right here, nothing in this chapter and any other provision of law shall be construed to prevent a common carrier subject to this chapter from entering into or operating under any contract with any common carrier not subject to this chapter. This is the heart and soul of why I don't see net neutrality ever working. Because for the most part, these companies that are being bought up in order to make the mega monopolies that are Verizon, that are AT&T, they're not actually breaking any laws until they go in such extremes that it is deemed unlawful by the Federal Communications Commission. And if you go through the history, and I actually do a decent job of that over on my blog, you'll find that T-Mobile and Verizon have both been found to be just in the eyes of these laws for operations including, but not limited to, I'm sorry, I got distracted by a message. I'm sorry, I lost my place. Where was I? T-Mobile engaged in a practice known as zero rating. Zero rating is the process of setting up prearranged deals where a company either pays you in order to have their product served without having it count against bandwidth limitations. And in this case, YouTube didn't want to pay that. But T-Mobile's subsidiary, T-Mobile Video, was basically able to stream all the video they wanted for free, as compared to YouTube and other services who either had to pay T-Mobile for that, or those charges for bandwidth usage were passed down to the consumer. And in one case, this was determined unlawful, and in another case, it was determined just. Verizon, if you go through, they've been fighting tooth and nail against the FTC in multiple different cases in order to prove the justness of their own zero rating programs. And in addition, these are companies who actively take part in what's called the revolving door of Washington, not just sending people to Congress, but people like Ajit Pai, who worked as Associate General Counsel for Verizon from 2001 to 2007, left Verizon with a substantial chunk of cash in his pocket for his severance package in order to go to the FCC and basically be a lobbyist working for the FCC. And this created no end of places where the FCC overlooked Verizon's what I would consider unjust and even criminal behaviors in the way that they handled their network. And you'd think, with me saying all of this, I must be on the side of net neutrality, but I'm not, because none of this protects anyone. It's only in the case of grand and extreme... I'm sorry about that, Sofka. YouTube is doing this new stuff where it's trying to just hide shit, and whenever I see that, I just pass the message through. I apologize. I have it all disabled, but YouTube is still doing it. Anyway, so we're going to move on to Section 202, which actually gets into the nitty-gritty of this shit. It shall be unlawful for any common carrier to make unjust or unreasonable discrimination in charges, practices, classifications, regulations, facilities, or services for or in connection with like communication service, directly or indirectly, by any means or device, or to make or give any undue or unreasonable preference or advantage to any particular person, class of persons, or locality, or to subject any particular person, class of persons, or locality to any undue or unreasonable prejudice or disadvantage. You may note, nowhere in that does it say that they're not allowed to not give undue or unreasonable preference to corporations. And this is the giant loophole in net neutrality as subject to Title II, or as it should be said, Title 47, that everyone overlooks. Nothing about this protects the consumers against companies taking what amount to severely monopolistic practices. Charges or services, when referred to in this chapter, include charges for or services in connection with the use of the common carrier lines of communication, whether derived from wire or radio facilities, in chain broadcasting or incidental to radio communication of any kind. Any carrier who knowingly violates the provisions of this section shall forfeit to the United States a sum of $6,000 for each offense and $300 for each and every day of the continuance of such offense. And of course, these were published June 19th, 1934. These laws are so archaic, are so out of date with regards to the very idea. I mean, the internet wasn't even a concept at this point. Telephones were still an enormous thing which barely anyone had in their homes. Radios were still the primary means of broadcast media. At no point did they ever even consider that the end user would be the one attempting to use these mediums for communication on any scale like what we have today. And this poses us a really large problem. However, and this is the awesome part, I really want to show you the solution to this problem, because there is. We don't need net neutrality because constitutionally we are already protected on the subject of free speech and usage of the only means of communication available to us. And that is, in this case, Marsh v. Alabama. Marsh v. Alabama was a case that took place on December 6, 1945, and decided on January 7, 1946. And it was the opinion of Justice Black who delivered this. In this case, we are asked to decide whether a state, consistently with the First and 14th Amendments, can impose criminal punishment on a person who undertakes to distribute religious literature on the premises of a company-owned town, contrary to the wishes of the town's management. The town, a suburb of Mobile, Alabama, known as Chickasaw, is owned by the Gulf Shipbuilding Corporation. Except for that, it has all the characteristics of any other American town. The property consists of residential buildings, streets, a system of sewers, a sewage disposal plant, and a business block on which businesses are situated. As the story goes on, I'm just going to skip ahead through this part. Merchants and services establishments have rented the stores and businesses on the business block, and the United States uses one of the places as a post office from which 6 carriers deliver mail to the people of Chickasaw and adjacent area. The appellant, a Jehovah's Witness, came onto the sidewalk and we have just described, stood near the post office and undertook to distribute religious literature. In the stores, the corporation had posted a notice which reads as follows: "This is private property, and without written permission, no street or house vendor, agent, or solicitation of any kind will be permitted." Appellant was warned that she could not distribute the literature without a permit, and that no permit would be issued to her. She protested that the company could not be constitutionally applied so as to prohibit her from distributing religious writings. When she was asked to leave the sidewalk and Chickasaw, she declined. The deputy sheriff arrested her, and she was charged in the state with violating Title 14, Section 246 of the 1940 Alabama Code, which makes it a crime to enter or remain on the premises of another after having been warned not to do so. So let's break this down. We have a Jehovah's Witness whose only desire was to spread religious literature, small tracts describing what it was to be a Jehovah's Witness. And at this time, she didn't have a telephone. having a telephone was something you didn't have a telephone for yourself for the most part, even in this time. Until after World War II, telephones were still extremely rare outside of post offices and telegram houses, which led to most people having the only means of being heard being standing on a soapbox in the middle of their town. This is where the term soapboxing comes from, of course. And this one woman, she was arrested for doing so because this town was considered private property. It was owned by a corporation. And this corporation had posted everywhere and had everyone else post everywhere. Without written consent, you can't solicit on the public streets. Now here's where things get interesting. Had the title to Chickasaw belonged not to a private, but to a municipal corporation, and had the appellant been arrested for violating a municipal ordinance rather than a ruling by those appointed by the corporation to manage a company town, it would have been clear that the appellant's conviction must be reversed. Under Lovell v. Griffin, 303 U.S. 444, and others which have followed that case, neither a state nor municipality can completely bar the distribution of literature containing religious or political ideals on the streets, sidewalks, and public places, or make the right to distribute dependent on a flat license tax or permit to be issued by an official who could deny it at will. We have also held that an ordinance, blah, 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 skipping ahead, Jameson v. Texas, and we have recognized that the preservation of a free society is so far dependent upon the right of each individual citizen to receive such literature as he himself might desire, that a municipality could not, without jeopardizing that vital freedom, prohibit door-to-door distribution of literature. Martin v. Struthers, 319 U.S. 141, 146, and 147. From these decisions, it is clear that had the people of Chickasaw owned all the homes and all the stores and all the streets and all the sidewalks, all those owners together could not have set up a municipal government with sufficient power to pass an ordinance completely barring the distribution of religious literature. Our question then narrows down to this. Can those people who live in or come to Chickasaw be denied freedom of press and religion simply because a single company has legal title to all the town? For it is the Senate's contention that the mere fact that all the property interests in the town are held by a single company is enough to give that company power, enforceable by a state statute, to abridge these freedoms. We do not agree that the corporation's property interests settle the question. The state urges, in effect, that the corporation's right to control the inhabitants of Chickasaw is coextensive with the right of a homeowner to regulate the conduct of his guests. We cannot accept that contention. Ownership does not always mean absolute dominion. The more an owner, for his advantage, and this is the part you need to really pay attention to, the more an owner, for his advantage, opens up his property for use by the public in general, the more do his rights become circumscribed by the statutory and constitutional rights of those who use it. CF Republican Aviation Corp v. Labor Board, 324 U.S. 793, 798, 802, number 8. Thus, the owners of privately held bridges, ferries, turnpikes, and railroads may not operate them as freely as a farmer does his farm. Since these facilities are built and operated primarily to the benefit of the public, and since their operation is essentially a public function, it is subject to state regulation. And you can go through and read the rest of this now nearly 70-year-old decision made by Justice Black, but what it boils down to in the case of net neutrality is state and federal regulation already apply to the internet as a means for the public to distribute information, political, religious ideals especially. There is no reason net neutrality needs to be used for this purpose, and in fact, a good lawyer, hell, a half-assed lawyer, could take this alone and produce the argument that services such as edge providers for 4G and 4G LTE connections to cell phones, social media services such as those provided by Google, Facebook, and Twitter, these groups have no right to censor except where things are in violation of the law, have no right to inhibit the rights of others, except where those actions taken are in violation of the law. None of these companies, whether they be the monopolistic content providers on the one side or the monopolistic ISPs on the other, have the right to be doing what they are doing as according to common law. And it would be so easy to take this reference into the Supreme Court, and yet no one has yet. If I had passed the bar in DC, which I've never even tried to, but I really probably should. Yes, Araki and Green Moon sums it up pretty tightly. I can deny you from speaking in my home, but if I own a store, you can speak however you want in my store, unless you are violating the law. And so it is with these highways, shall we say, these bridges across the internet by which every human these days depends in order to communicate. They are not as private as people would like to think they seem. These companies are subject to federal and state regulation far greater than the citizens whom they censor, whom they put through extremely egregious financial, unjust financial burden in the case of ISPs. And the argument shouldn't be about net neutrality at all, especially because the repealing of the Title II net neutrality code does not repeal the original FCC findings about the internet as described in 2002, 2005, and 2010. And for those, you definitely have to go over to my blog on Minds to get those links, because I might not have put them in the description box below. The fact of the matter is, net neutrality has served as a form of protection for companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook to condemn and force ISPs to manage this infrastructure while they themselves should be subject to the same thing. They are also content and service and application providers as defined by the original FCC findings. And net neutrality did away with all of the benefits that the original FCC findings gave to consumers and gave them to companies like Google, like Twitter and Facebook, like Amazon, and at the expense of our ISPs. Why do ISPs continue to act in such antitrusted ways? Because they were fucked and had to make the money. Does that make it right? Not at all. In fact, it makes it just as criminal as the antitrust, as the monopolistic practices of Google, of Facebook, of Amazon. So there's my 2 cents, and I'm glad net neutrality has been repealed, because now these giants are no longer classified as a utility. They're merely a common carrier, which means Title 47 still applies to them. They still are required to maintain interconnection for the sake of the national and international infrastructure. And now people are able to begin filing class action lawsuits against companies like Google and Facebook, who were previously completely immune due to their sheer size, and the people in the FCC who would give them free benefits. That That was quite the fucking rant there. Thank you guys for putting up with that. Let me go run over the chat right quick, see what I've missed. Oh, I've got some people I haven't seen in a while. Wonderful. I'm so glad to have you here. Sofka, I haven't seen you in a while. Rick Sheck, I see you every week. I'm glad to have you here. Dean Truelove, glad to have you here. JF, I haven't seen you in forever. And yeah, I'm really happy to do that. I was really happy to spend the time. Oh shit, you know what? I forgot to talk about one more point. The other problem, and the reason that I brought up Ajit Pai having worked for Verizon, is the subject of what is called regulatory capture. And I'm just going to do a quick read through about regulatory capture for you. Regulatory capture is a form of government failure which occurs when a regulatory agency, in this case the FCC, created to act in the public interest, instead advances the commercial or political concerns of special interest groups that dominate the industry or sector it is charged with regulating. When regulatory capture occurs, the interests of firms or political groups are prioritized over the interests of the public, leading to a net loss to society as a whole. Does that make sense? Oh, thank you so much, Rick Sheck. Rick Sheck just dropped in $2. Says, fuck yeah, Sevi, Googleopolies suck. They absolutely do. They are essentially fiefdoms at this point. But I want you to consider what I just said there, because that's some important shit. When regulatory capture occurs, the interests of firms or political groups, Google, Fusion GPS, are prioritized over the interests of the public, leading to a net loss to society as a whole. Government agencies suffering regulatory capture are called captured agencies. The reason I care about this so much, and the reason I'm glad the FCC has repealed the Title II attachment for net neutrality, is because now it's out of the hands of a captured regulatory agency, whether they realize they've done that or not. Now the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is responsible for Google, for Facebook, for Verizon, for AT&T. These companies are now open to a litany of litigations, because they have been freed from the identity of being a utility. They are no longer a utility. They are now just a common carrier, and they are no longer protected as a necessity, a monopolized necessity within the country. Anyway, let us move on to our next story, which I'm sure you're all gonna fucking love. Judicial Watch president. Forget Mueller. The real question is, do we need to shut down the FBI? This story blew my fucking mind when it broke. I was so happy to hear about this shit. So we're going to start by reading our dear friend Tyler Durden from Zero Hedge. However, we've got a few articles and a couple of videos to go over on top of this, so bear with me. There's some really interesting stuff in here. Echoing the thoughts that undoubtedly run through the minds of many Americans following the startling revelations of an insurance policy crafted by FBI agents Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok to prevent a Trump presidency at all costs, something we've covered here, blah, 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 blah. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton appeared on Fox News last night to say it's time to move beyond discussing whether or not it's appropriate to shut down Special Counsel Mueller's investigation and move on to consider whether it's now time to consider shutting down the entire FBI after it was turned into a KGB-type operation by the Obama administration. I have to take exception with Tom Fitton saying that, because it wasn't the Obama administration that turned the FBI into a KGB outfit. The FBI has always been a KGB outfit. It's worth noting that despite the fact the FBI has a charter, is a chartered government agency, it is not actually a public agency. Much like the CIA, the FBI is a private company, And for most of its existence, from 1933 to all the way to 1975, its early existence, excuse me, it had no charter. It was only under Johnson and Carter, Presidents Johnson and Carter, that we even saw discourse on the subject of whether or not the FBI should have a charter, at which point the 1977 FBI charter was published. However, it was never approved by Congress, and by 1981, with the election of Ronald Reagan, the idea of enforcing that charter or signing that charter into law and regulation had completely left the American minds. That was no longer a subject, especially amidst the terrifying idea of the Mujahideen. I've always fucked that one up. And the CIA's proxy war against Russia at that time. To continue reading, this is a quote from this man right here, Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch. Fusion GPS was a Hillary Clinton campaign vendor, and the DOJ was working hand in glove with it. Perhaps paying them money, they were, there's evidence of that out now. The suspicion is they were paying them money. Top DOJ official's wife was working with them. There was no distinction between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Department of Justice and the FBI. Forget about the investigation into Trump and Clinton being compromised by these conflicts. I think the FBI has been compromised. Forget about shutting down Mr. Mueller. Do we need to shut down the FBI because it was turned to blah, 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 blah. We already read that part. So, and this is where we get to one of the most amazing things I've heard come out of my favorite fucking congressman's mouths in a long time. For those who missed it, Representative Trey Gowdy, the Republican from South Carolina, did a masterful job during Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's hearing yesterday of summarizing all of the DOJ-FBI conflicts, which proved that Special Counsel Mueller's probe is nothing but a farcical, politically motivated witch hunt led by Obama and Clinton loyalists. If you've missed this exchange, it's definitely worth a listen, and we are going to switch over to the full screen for this. Oh, no, don't be muted. Wow, okay, I'm fucking this up royally. I'm sorry, guys.
What in the hell is...
Here.
But when I go home to South Carolina this weekend, trust me when I tell you, no one is going to ask me about any of those issues. They're going to ask me, what in the hell is going on with the Department of Justice and the FBI? The reason we have special counsel, this is a very important point, and you know it, the reason we have special counsel is because of a conflict of interest. The regulation itself specifically makes reference to a conflict of interest. And we don't like conflicts of interest because it undercuts people's confidence in both the process and the result. So let's be really clear why we have special counsel. There was either a real or perceived conflict of interest that we were fearful would either impact the result or people's confidence in the process. That's why we have something called special counsel, and that's why we have special counsel in this fact pattern. And then lo and behold, those who are supposed to make sure there are no conflicts of interest seem to have a few of their own. There's a senior prosecutor who sent obsequious emails to a fact witness. She can be described as nothing other than a fact witness. She's a really important fact witness if you pursue the line of inquiry that my Democrat friends want to pursue. They got off of collusion and now they're on obstruction of justice. She may be the most important fact witness in an obstruction of justice case. And the senior prosecutor for this conflict of interest-free special counsel sent a fawning, obsequious email to a fact witness. And then we have prosecutors assigned to conduct this investigation who donated almost exclusively to one candidate over another. And then we have a prosecutor assigned to this conflict of interest-free team that attended what was supposed to be, what he'd hoped to be, a victory party for Secretary Clinton. And we have a senior DOJ official, Mr. Deputy Attorney General, with an office that used to be 2 doors down from yours, meeting with Fusion GPS. And Fusion GPS, of course, was paying for Russian dirt on the very person that they're supposed to be objectively investigating. And then that same senior DOJ official's wife, the one that met with Fusion GPS, his wife was on the payroll of Fusion GPS. And then we have a senior agent assigned to investigate Secretary Clinton's email, help draft the exoneration letter, where we changed the language from grossly negligent to extremely careless, interviewed Secretary Clinton in an interview I've never seen, and I doubt you have either in your career as a prosecutor, interviewed Michael Flynn, was actively involved in the investigation into the Trump campaign before the Inspector General found his text. So this agent, in the middle of almost everything related to Secretary Clinton and President Trump, sent pro-Clinton texts, anti-Trump texts to his paramour in response to being told maybe he is where he is to protect the country from that menace, Donald Trump. He said, I can protect our country at many levels. And then he said Hillary Clinton should win 100 million to nothing. Now think about that, Mr. Deputy Attorney General. That's a pretty overwhelming victory. 100 million to 0. And when I read that last night, what I thought was this conflict of interest free senior agent of the FBI can't think of a single solitary American who would vote for Donald Trump. That's where the 0 comes in. Not a single solitary American he can imagine would vote for Donald Trump. This is the conflict of interest free special agent assigned. And then he went on, if that weren't enough, to belittle Trump supporters by saying he could smell them at a Walmart in Virginia. This is the person we needed to avoid a conflict of interest. And then he said this, they fully deserve to go and demonstrate the absolute bigoted nonsense of Trump. But he wasn't content to just disparage Donald Trump. He had to disparage Donald Trump's family. This is what he said, Mr. Deputy Attorney General. He said the douchebags are about to come out. He's talking about our First Lady and children. This conflict of interest-free special agent of the FBI. This is who we were told we needed to have an objective, impartial, fair, conflict of interest-free investigation. So he's openly pulling for the candidate he had a role in clearing, and he's openly investigating a candidate that he has bias against. And then if that's not enough, he says Trump is an effing idiot. What the F just happened to our country? This is the same man that said he would save our country. What happens when people who are supposed to cure the conflict of interest have even greater conflicts of interest than those they replace? Well, that's not a rhetorical question. You nor I nor anyone else would ever sit Peter Strzok on a jury. We wouldn't have him objectively, dispassionately investigate anything knowing what we know now. Why didn't we know it ahead of time? And my last question, my final question to you, and I appreciate the chairman's patience, how would you help me answer that question when I go back to South Carolina this weekend?
Congressman, first of all, with regard to the special counsel, Mr. Strzok was already working on the investigation when the special counsel was appointed. The appointment that I made was of Robert Mueller. And so what I'd recommend that you tell your constituents is that Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray are accountable, and that we will ensure that no bias is reflected in any of the actions taken by the special counsel or in any matter within the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. When we have evidence of any inappropriate conduct, we're going to take action on it. And that's what Mr. Mueller did here. As soon as he learned about this issue, he took action. And that's what I anticipate that the rest of our prosecutors, our new group of U.S. attorneys, our Justice Department appointees, they understand the rules and they understand the responsibility to defend the integrity of the department. And if they find evidence of improper conduct, they're going to take action. So, Congressman, that's the best assurance I can give you. But actually, there's one other point, which is you should tell your constituents.
Bunch of fucking bullshit from this guy. I'm not even going to let him finish fucking talking. because I'm not going to sit here and listen to him give non-answers to some of the most important questions that are taking place within the House Judiciary Committee at this time. However, I am going to take a minute to stop and say thank you to Self-Sealing Stembolt, who threw me €5 and said, sorry to leave so early, but I have to get some rest. Keep up the good work. Love, Stembolt. Thank you so very much, sweetheart. It's wonderful having you around, and I hope you rest well. But we are going to have to move forward because it's not just Rosenstein. It's not just Mueller. There's a lot fucking going on at the FBI. The FBI's Andrew McCabe has an Orr problem. Will not testify on Tuesday, source says. From Fox News, the Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who is reportedly scheduled to testify behind closed doors in front of the House Intelligence Committee on Tuesday, will instead meet next week due to a scheduling error, Department of Justice officials told Fox News. McCabe's testimony was likely to, at least in part, focus on Peter Strzok's role in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Strzok is a former deputy to the Assistant Director of the FBI who was removed from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's staff after Mueller learned Strzok had exchanged anti-Trump texts with a colleague. House investigators previously told Fox News that they have long regarded Strzok as a key figure in the chain of events when the Bureau, in 2016, received the infamous anti-Trump dossier, which launched a counterintelligence investigation into possible Russian meddling in the election. This was a routine scheduling error, blah, blah, blah. The FBI regrets the error, and, skipping ahead. Steele is a former British spy who reportedly compiled the dossier of allegations about President Trump's ties to Russia. Fox News was also shown an internal email from senior FBI officials, or from a senior FBI official, instructing a subordinate to confirm with the committee that the Steele handler would visit the committee on December 12th and McCabe on the 19th. But Fox News was told by those familiar with the matter that the Intelligence Committee is suspicious of the purported scheduling error. One source said they believe the schedule issue arose after Fox News' report Monday night on the Department of Justice official Bruce Orr. Orr was recently demoted from one of his 2 senior posts. Fox News reported that Orr's wife, Nellie Orr, worked through last fall for Fusion GPS. You notice this name keeps coming up? Fusion GPS, who was behind the anti-Trump dossier. The precise nature of Mrs. Orr's duties, including whether she worked on the dossier, remains unclear, but a review of her published works available online reveals Mrs. Orr has written extensively on Russia-related subjects. McCabe has an Orr problem, one congressional source said. The supposition that the Justice Department officials realized McCabe would face questions about Orr, and he is not prepared to respond. The committee is prepared to subpoena all Justice Department documents and records related to the scheduling debacle, the source said. The committee is also prepared to subpoena McCabe to compel his testimony later this week. Now, Fusion GPS is disturbingly corrupt. They're almost entirely funded by Obama for America and the Clinton Foundation. They are severely partisan to the side of the Democrats, have direct ties to people, not only Nellie Orr, but other individuals within the DNC. And direct ties like this in an investigation are usually a large telltale sign. When you investigate corruption, when you investigate conflicts of interest, it is this exact kind of behavior in which you see a married person send their wife to work for a company that has ties to the party or politician which you're working for, that send up red flags. And yet, despite, now almost every week having read off the list of investigators on Robert Mueller's special investigation team and their involvement in donating to and working for Hillary Clinton, the State Departments, and the DNC, no one seems to have wanted to bring up the conflict of interest until just now. Now, there's one other important conflict of interest to think about, and that is Peter Strzok's so-called, Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok's so-called insurance policy, which I mentioned earlier in the Zero Hedge article. From Town Hall, piggybacking off Katie and Courtney on these texts between FBI agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Strzok was on Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team, investigating possible collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, but was removed in August once these texts became public knowledge. Page had already moved on from the Mueller assignment. Page is the woman with whom Strzok was having an extramarital affair. With whom, that should be. The texts are filled with Hillary praising and Trump bashing. At one point, Page says that Trump should go fuck himself and that he's a loathsome human. That's one of the 10,000 texts shared between these two agents. Yet, in more cryptic texts, Strzok mentions an insurance policy against this presidency. From the Daily Caller, two FBI officials who worked on Special Counsel Mueller's Russia investigation exchanged text messages last year in which they appear to have discussed ways to prevent Donald Trump from being elected president. From those texts, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, Andy being Andrew McCabe, that there's no way Trump gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk, FBI counterintelligence official Peter Strzok wrote. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40, Strzok wrote in another text dated August 15th. Well, the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Russian interference began July of 2016. It's possible that that's what they were referring to, but overall, it's still quite unsettling to see members of our nation's preeminent law enforcement and intelligence agencies thinking of ways to screw over the next president of the United States, just because they don't like him or her. This is a problem we have been seeing over and over and over in the investigations, not only into Donald Trump, but also the investigations into our dear friend Hillary Clinton. And after a year of people dismissing, and after a year since James Comey was removed from the FBI, and the corruption within the FBI became a subject for me, although not for many other news outlets, we finally have confirmation of the edits made by Comey, as was listed by the congressman from South Carolina, Trey Gowdy, changing the language from grossly negligent to, I can't remember exactly what it was, but here. A draft statement from the AP, former FBI Director James Comey prepared in anticipation of concluding the Hillary Clinton email case without criminal charges, was heavily edited to change the tone and substance of the remark, Republican Senator said on Thursday. Some of the edits proposed to the May 2016 draft, obtained by the Associated Press, appear to soften the gravity of the Bureau's findings. Comey, for instance, initially wrote that the FBI believed that Clinton and her aides were grossly negligent in their handling of classified information. Language also contained in the relevant criminal statutes, but the text was then edited to say that they were simply extremely careless in their use of a personal email server, a phrase Comey adopted for his July 5th public announcement that the FBI would not be recommending charges. And of course, we have, throughout this article, more and more examples. Comey's ultimate statement also omitted language asserting that the sheer volume of information, classified as secret at the time it was shared, made it reasonable to believe that the former Secretary of State's state and her aides were grossly negligent. In addition, while Comey said it was reasonably likely that hostile actors had gained access to Clinton's email server, the text was edited to say that such an intrusion was possible. The original version noted that the FBI had worked with partners of the intelligence community to determine whether the server had been compromised. While it was unclear what significance this had, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong panel. While it was clear that what significance this had, it was omitted from Comey's final text. Though the FBI had not yet interviewed Clinton, then the Democratic candidate for president. At the time the statement was drafted, FBI officials had already determined that criminal charges were probably not warranted and had begun thinking about how to present that conclusion to the public. And I want you to remember, Hillary Clinton destroyed 33,000 emails using a tool called BleachBit. If any obstruction of justice is to be found in those 33,000 emails, it cannot be found. And as such, Comey's decision to not press charges is completely without warrant. As we saw back in January of this year, Comey was taking his cues from Hillary Clinton rather directly. And now we can see that the FBI basically operates as a wing of the Democratic Party, not the American government. And as such, I kind of stand with our friend Tom Fitton, despite the slightly partisan nature of the way he talks. I think the FBI absolutely needs to be under investigation. And that's going to bring us to our last little bit of news on this subject. I'm not going to say much, but I want you to listen to what the senator from Ohio, excuse me, I keep saying senator, the congressman from Ohio, Jim Jordan, says. After Gowdy's speech there, Jim Jordan gave his own little speech, and it is quite the fascinating little piece here.
5 minutes.
Did the FBI pay Christopher Steele, and was the dossier the basis for securing warrants at the FISA court to spy on Americans associated with the Trump campaign? Really, when you sum it all up, it boils down to those fundamental questions. Did you pay the guy who wrote it? And did you use what he wrote, disproven, discredited dossier paid for by the Clinton campaign? Did you use it to go get warrants to spy on Americans? That's what it comes down to. And you're the guy who can answer those questions. And yesterday I was convinced that the answer to those questions was probably yes. But today I'm even more convinced the answer is yes, based on the text messages we got to read early this morning. Mr. Rosenstein, you know Peter Strzok? You familiar with that name?
Yes, I'm familiar with the name. And
former deputy head of counterintelligence at the FBI? Peter Strzok, that one?
I don't know his precise title, but yes, he had a significant role in...
Peter Strzok ran the Clinton campaign, interviewed Mills, Abedin, Clinton, changed the exoneration letter from gross negligence to extreme carelessness. Peter Strzok, who ran the Russian investigation, interviewed Mike Flynn. Peter Strzok selected by Mr. Mueller to be on his team. That Peter Strzok, we learned, had all these text messages. We got to read some of them early this morning. Now, as my colleagues have pointed out, some of them are, they show he didn't like Trump. He and Miss Page are exchanging text messages back and forth, show they don't like the president. But that's nothing new. Everyone on Mueller's team, no one on Mueller's team likes Trump. We already knew that. But I want to focus on one in particular. One in particular. And this is a text message from Mr. Strzok to Miss Page, recalling a conversation and a meeting that took place in Andrew McCabe's office, Deputy Director of the FBI, recalling a meeting earlier. And Mr. Strzok says this: I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office. Then there's a break. Dash, it says that there's no way he gets elected. No way Trump gets elected. He says, I want to believe that. You said that in the meeting in Andrew McCabe's office. I want to believe that. But then he goes, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. Now, this goes to intent. He says, we can't take the risk that, the people of this great country might elect Donald Trump president. We can't take this risk. This is Peter Strzok, head of counterintelligence at the FBI. This is Peter Strzok, who I think had a hand in that dossier that was all dressed up and taken to the FISA court. He's saying we can't take the risk. We have to do something about it. Now, don't forget the timeline here either, Mr. Rosenstein. Peter Strzok, January 10th, he's the guy who changes the exoneration letter from gross negligence, criminal standard, to extreme carelessness. July 2nd, he's the guy who sets in on the Clinton interview. July 5th, 2016, that's when Comey has the press conference and says, we're not going to prosecute. Clinton's okay, we're not going to prosecute. And then August 2016, we have this text message. The same month that the Russian investigation is opened at the FBI, August 2016. And my guess is that's the same month that the application was taken to the FISA court to get the warrants to spy on Americans. Using this dossier that the Clinton campaign paid for, Democrats paid for, fake news, all dressed up, taken to the court. So I got really just a couple basic questions. Because it seems to me if the answer to any of those two questions, if the answer is yes, if you guys paid Christopher Steele at the same time the Democrats in the Clinton campaign were paying, or if you took the dossier, dressed it all up, took it to the FISA court, and used that as the basis to get warrants, and now we have intent in this text message saying that there's another text message, my colleague referenced it earlier, where Mr. Strzok says, I can protect our country at many levels. Says it with all the humility he could muster. I can protect our country at many levels. This guy thought he was Super Agent James Bond at the FBI. This is obvious. I'm afraid we can't take that risk. We can't. There's no way we can let the American people make Donald Trump the next president. I got to protect our country. This is unbelievable. And I'm here to tell you, Mr. Rosenstein, I think the public trust in this whole thing is gone. So it seems to me you got two things you can do. You're the guy in charge. You're the guy who picked Mueller. You're the guy who wrote the memo saying why he needed to fire Comey. You're the guy in charge. You could disband the Mueller special prosecutor, and you can do what we've all called for. Appoint a second special counsel to look into this, to look into Peter Strzok, Bruce Orr, everything else we've learned in the last several weeks.
Yes, Congressman, and I can assure you that I consider it very important to make sure that
I'm not going to give Rosenstein the time to talk because he just fucking weasels around and says, I assure you we're going to do our job when no one is doing their fucking job. I'm utterly disgusted by the way things like this have actually turned out. We are looking at perhaps the largest failure of government and the necessity for a special investigation into the existing special investigation on Russia. That's a nice little recursive set of special investigations right there. An investigation into whether or not Russia interfered with the election, an investigation into the investigation of whether or not there was collusion or conflicts of interest. This is absolutely out of hand, and to have these senators speaking their minds so liberally, so effectively, is an honor in my soul to this country, because that is what they should be doing. And yet there's only a small handful of people within Congress who have the fucking balls to stand up and say, look, I'm not here for Trump's sake, I'm not here for Clinton's sake, I'm here for my constituents' sake. And my constituents need to know, was there a severe conflict of interest? Was there criminal negligence on the part of these people? Did the senior head of the FBI, the senior head of counterintelligence, deputy head of counterintelligence at the FBI, spend his time and focus trying to pretend he was above the law in order to take down Trump? These are questions that absolutely need to be answered. And unfortunately, it might not be until, well, when is the 19th or 20th? It might not be until Tuesday or Wednesday of next week that we have answers for that. However, there has been a little bit of good news this week, and this isn't going to be my longest show, but it's going to be a decent one. we're going to listen to a little bit of Donald Trump's speech at the FBI National Academy, a subject that came up as very controversial, but the beginning of this speech is actually pretty awesome, so I wanted to share this with you and then read for you an article directly relating to it, which I find absolutely amazing, has gotten very little to no coverage in the media. And that is here.
Thank you very much, everybody. That's a lot of years since the last president. And we'll be back. And thank you to Attorney General Sessions. Thank you, Director Wray, Assistant Director Resch, for hosting me here at the FBI National Academy to address our wonderful local police and sheriffs from all over America. Very special honor. And it's an honor to stand here today with the incredible men and women of law enforcement. Thank you. We're here to celebrate your graduation from the National Academy at Quantico. For over 80 years, this rigorous and world-renowned program has trained America's most dedicated local law enforcement officers from all disarm a criminal and to deliver a child safely to her mother's arms. I am here not only to congratulate you, but to honor you for your courage and for your devotion. And I want you to know that with me as your president, America's police will have a true friend and loyal champion in the White House, more loyal than anyone else can be. I tell you. Thank you. Thank you. I also want to take a moment to speak to all of the law enforcement families here today. You make tremendous sacrifices. American families can sleep soundly at night because of the burden that you carry for all of us. So on behalf of all Americans, to every law enforcement family here today and all across the nation, thank you, thank you, thank you very much. And you do that under the most difficult conditions. You very rarely get the recognition you deserve, I can tell you that. But your families know what you deserve. And ultimately, that's the most important thing, isn't it? It's not a news story when our officers save a life, rescue a family, or stop a crime. It's just another day on the job. Yet no matter the circumstances, you serve tirelessly, selflessly, and heroically. You do it because you really believe in doing your duty and doing it properly. Being a police officer is not just a career, it's a calling, and I've seen it. I have so many friends that are police officers.
I'm gonna cut him off right there. I must have gotten the wrong link. Unfortunately, I was trying to get to the segment where he starts talking about one of the most fascinating things I have heard a president talk about in my adult life, and that is, of course, taking on the cartelized gang of MS-13. Let me jump over here and read this to you. Is this going
system
to be a better
of immigration? We want a system that puts the needs of American families, taxpayers, and security first. That is why I have also directed the federal government, law enforcement, to work closely with our state and local police to destroy criminal cartels like the savages of MS-13. Already this year, the Department of Justice has worked with partners in Central America to arrest and charge roughly 4,000 MS-13 members. And the Department of Homeland Security has arrested nearly 800 MS-13 gang members and associates, an 83% increase from the previous year, and we're much higher this year than we were last year, and we'll get rid of them completely very soon, right? Right? They're working hard. Earlier this year, ICE officers conducted the largest crackdown on criminal gangs in the history of our country. In just 6 weeks, ICE, these are great people too, great people, and the Border Patrol agents, great people, and our law enforcement partners arrested nearly 1,400 suspects and seized more than 200 illegal firearms and nearly 600 rounds of narcotics and over 600 pounds. It's a lot of stuff. Recently, prosecutions of criminal firearm possessions were up 23%. To any member of MS-13 listening, I have a message for you. We will find you, we will arrest you, we will jail you, we will throw you the hell out of the country. I mean, somehow I like it better than jail. Jail, we have to take care of them. Who the hell wants to take care of them?
All right, that was the section I was actually looking for. But this is truly, unprecedented in a very long time. And while I'm almost certain there are going to be cries of racism, in a week where all I saw left and right were failures of government, failures of investigation, this was a moment of joy. Trump here is speaking to the graduating class of Quantico, Virginia, the FBI National Academy. And in doing so, he is speaking to people who have yet to be corrupted by a troubled system. People who will grow up, who will grow in this career to become the next leaders of the FBI. And he is making friends, and he is making assurances that we are going to deal with the true problems on our streets, the gang problems in our nation. It touches me at my heart to hear these things from a president, because this wasn't the kind of thing I heard under Obama. This wasn't the kind of thing I heard under Bush or the Bill Clinton. From the transcript. Oh no, that's literally just a transcript of the article. But it's genuinely heartwarming to hear him speak so kindly, lovingly to these FBI agents who have yet, while their superiors, their bosses, are being thrown out, fired, and charged with severe crimes, the president goes to the National Academy and says, "You all are great people who have accomplished something great in completing this Marine Corps developed training." It's quite beautiful to see that kind of honor again, and it makes me very proud. Just like it makes me proud to be doing this work that I do for y'all every week, putting on this show. It is a large part of what I feel I should be doing, and it keeps me focused. It keeps me focused, it keeps me happy, knowing that I'm going to come here and see you guys, talk to you guys, get to wish you guys a happy weekend, happy week, because, well, I cover a lot of depressing shit, but I'm not here to depress you. I'm not here to wrangle with drama. I just want to make sure you're informed. And while I'm kind of feverish, not doing the best today, and I have to finish the show early, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for showing up, because it's so important to me to be doing this, to be letting you guys know what is going on while the mainstream media themselves do their damnedest to ignore the facts and instead use every story as a jumping platform for their partisan, biased, and even grandly regressive ideas. So as I do for every show, I want to give a huge thank you to GhostDog999, to Ottakeen Green Moon, to JF, to Self-Sealing Stem Bolts, to Rick Sheck, to Sofka, to Dean Truelove, to all of you in the audience who weren't speaking, just listening along. I know you're out there, and I appreciate you giving me your time. I really hope this has been an informative and helpful show, and I will see you, well, with luck, tomorrow on Twitch. But if not, I'll see you next week. Same damn time, same damn place. Bonsoir.